it's great to start out with our very first minimum level entry from the Patreon supporters. And actually, Alberto, he submitted like the entire movement orchestrated, and yeah, I really wish that I could evaluate that, but we're just doing minim on this particular score as you entered it. So I'm just that's why the music cut off right here, and the score went to this point. And also, I cut out quite a few instruments. In the complete score, there are upper winds and upper strings, of course, and there's a trumpet as well. I just cut all that out so that I could really maximize the size of these staves, bring up the view as big as possible. So this score actually has a lot of similarities to mine, which is really great. It's really cool to see another orchestrator working along the same lines as me and coming to some of the same conclusions. Like, I really like the bass drum hit on those lower crunches, and then also with the side drum just doing its little flam there, and yeah, that's really 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 cool. And then alternating snap pizzicato on those hits. Okay, that is all very, very nice. So, of course, as you probably have noticed by now, if you've watched some of the other evaluations, Alberto, I am pretty much down on harps competing with the other bass instruments. You would really need something a little bit more aggressive in order to compete with the loud percussion here. It'll just swallow, loud percussion, loud pizzicato. Add those two things together, with timpani, bass drum, and snare, and it will just basically take away the sound of the harp. So nobody will be able to hear this unless they're standing right next to the harp. And that isn't really, that's more mixing than it is orchestration. Now, I mean, there are things that you could do to replace these tones, right? You could have added more pizzicato in the cellos and so on. So, I mean, there are solutions around it. The sound of the harp doesn't really need to be, doesn't really need to be there. It doesn't really add a whole lot to the tone. I'm not sure what that F flat would really do for the music. Yeah. Anyway, but all the same, pretty cool. I mean, it's an idea that would have worked maybe on a different instrument or in a different kind of balance, right? I'm not totally rejecting any harp scoring at all, as you might have seen in the website videos, the website entries. I think there was one composer who just about made it work for harp at the entrance. But anyway, so this is kind of cool. Contrabassoon, bass trombone, and then tuba coming in. I don't know why you wait so long to have the tuba come in. It could have come in right here, just along with the contrabassoon and bass trombone all together. But if you wanted a little bit of, if you wanted it not to attack so strongly before you got to here, then that's understandable. Also having the bass clarinet coming in, that's all cool. It's going to have a really, really focused, really intense tone, and this. I almost feel, Alberto, like you have come up with a very inevitable approach here. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if I were to say, what is the most safe, the most characteristic way that you could score this? And I would say, like, you've really ticked that box, right? So coming in with with bass clarinet, contrabassoon, bass trombone, and tuba, and really having a focused sound, I think is excellent, right? And also having very simple solutions to the opening drums, and the whole idea of drums and pipes, right? So to having the drums be very simple and straightforward, I think that works really good too. And also snap pizzicato on this. That was another idea that where you and I are similar. Okay, so I feel that that's really really good. and then A2 bassoons with A2 trombones. Now, the bassoons are going to get swallowed a little bit up in the trombone tone, but if you don't put them in, there definitely will be a difference. Two bassoons are equal to about half a trombone in terms of how much projection they can put forward. But I noticed that you go right away to tuba plus first trombone, and I don't know if you needed to really back off with that just to have a single trombone playing along with the tuba, and of course harp is just not going to make any difference there. I appreciate that you are trying to find your way around tunings. You're having enharmonic tunings here and there to make sure that you have all the pitches that you need. Okay, that's great, but it still is a bit of a wasted gesture just because the harp is not going to come through. If you had both harps playing this line in octaves, marked triple F, 2 octaves higher, then you would hear the harps, right? But they just cannot compete at pitch with heavy brass. It's just not, it's not an option. Okay. But all the same, it's a really good treatment of that line. Okay. Now I do like the way that you have these long notes and you have them dovetailing. So you probably, if people have been watching these evaluations as they come out, you might remember that I said, hey, that's a really long time to be holding tuba, and this is a good solution to that, right? To have the instruments dovetail. Now, of course, the players are really going to have to be listening to each other and understanding that they're dovetailing so that they can match their tone and their timbre, right? If you just listen to this mock-up the way that it is, as you remember from the beginning of the video, then you will notice that that it doesn't really dovetail very well, but that would be solved in a concert situation, right? Bass clarinet dovetailing to contrabassoon is not really it's that their tone is so different that it is not going to really dovetail all that seamlessly. But tuba dovetailing to bass trombone, that will work if they are paying attention to each other. And if you have these blended tones dovetailing to one another, then that will also work. I also like the fact that you brought down the loudness of the pedal tones right away. Okay, that's like you just immediately dropped it. I think there should be a bit of diminuendo here too, right? Because the bass trombonists might keep their dynamic level very strong, and then when they drop out, then the other players are already kind of down at almost mezzo forte, right? So this will stick out like a sore thumb. Okay, so that is a tweak that I would make. Okay, and then I like these rolls on bass drum. They're very, very nice. I think they're very, very effective to have that kind of, that actually helps the drone. It sort of blends into the drone a bit. Okay, and it just is really kind of a nice rugged sound to be continuing on. Okay. Dun 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 bum 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 bum. This was great to have first and third horn come in. Now, here's what I would say is that in a situation like this, it is better to actually have the first and second horn play because they're sitting right next to each other. You don't need to think of the third horn player as like, oh, he's the, like the third horn player is just another, just another solo horn. So they should be, that player should always be doubling up with the first horn when there is some kind of little solo line or something like that. And that is actually not the most dependable way to solve this problem. It's much better to have the first and second horn play together because they are partners, right? The first and the third are both high players, but the first and the second are partners, right? They play together. They cooperate on a lot of things, and it's nice to have them playing A2 because the first and the second have this really great relationship. The second is constantly trying to match the first, and they often play certain passages and intervals and octaves and so on in classic scoring, like the classical period. Then going into the Romantic period, they often do things together. They conspire together in a way that the third and fourth horns do not. Okay, so watch out for that. Now this is great though. Off four horns on that concert B. Concert. I meant to say concert E, written B. Okay, and those are doubled by, of course, once again, bassoons, clarinets, and then, we've got the cello here. Harp is inconsequential, doesn't really need to be there. See, here I would give more support to the bum 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 line because you've got the if there was some way to maybe throw in some pizzicato in the violas, like to have the pizzicato violas continue going on, I think that would be a really effective way to deal with it. Or you could give that line to the cellos, which have much more carrying power, and they could play lower down. And then the violas could be holding this line arco. All right? So there are ways around the problem. Yes, you've got the pizzicato and the double bass, but I mean, still, I just feel it just needs a little bit more support altogether if you're not going to give it the heavy brass right in there. Okay, or you could put in, trombones or something, but I think it's nice to have the contrast. Okay, and I think it is nice to have A2 horns here as opposed to just to give a contrast to the sound of the heavy brass. So yeah, but I mean, everything else is actually really nicely done. And so expanding a little bit on this, how could you get this first page ready to go to the stands, right? When I say getting ready to go to the stands, I mean sitting on a musician's stand in the orchestra. You would feel that you'd proofread it, you fixed all the mistakes, everything else, right? So I would say just pretty much dropping this down, right? And even maybe writing in a dynamic level, right? You could, if you're thinking sforzando, you're marked at forte. You could maybe you could leave it blank. You could just put in a diminuendo mark and not say anything here, not have a destination. Or you could have a destination of, say, like mezzo forte, right? And same thing for the contrabassoon. I think that should also fade out. I would also possibly mark staccato for some of this if you want that sort of more biting tone. Now, without staccato, it actually sounds fine. It will have a more abrupt sound to it, right? And especially if it's separated like this with rests in between, there is a factor of not staccato, but just of shortness, just short notes. Short notes don't have to be staccato. They can just be singly articulated, right? Without necessarily making them brief or biting. All right. But it might be better to spell that out, right? And then I would say just ditch the harps, or think of something else that they can do, something useful that they can contribute to the sound picture, right? And then I would say your piece is pretty much ready. Now this tam-tam stroke here, the player kind of has to know what dynamic you intend for them. Pretty much, most of your markings are pretty good. I don't think you've really left anything out that's significant. Except, you kind of have to. I mean, sforzando is great, but I mean, it's basically just an accent, right? And so it's a loud hit. Okay, that's fine. But do you really want? Do you want it to sort of match the rest of the dynamics? Do you want it to be a little backed off a little bit? Because if you really hit this, it will dominate the, if you give that, if you are at forte and you do an accent on tam-tam that's supposed to last for two beats right here, you'll get a boom, and then you'll feel the sudden cutoff, right? You'd sort of, or if you really want it to hang there, I would say maybe even just mark it all the way out, right? Because it's just 2/4 time, right? Maybe go 2 bars and then have another hanging tie. Anyway, just kind of a way to really sort of make sure. But it will really dominate the sound there if you hit it. It's essentially a fortissimo stroke, right? If you have an accented, if you're accented at forte, it'll feel like a fortissimo stroke. All right. So those are just some of the finer points of balance there, but those are things that the conductor can also handle in the middle of the rehearsal, if they feel that this is being too loud. I have actually had people back way off. I've seen percussionists, and this is interesting, particularly in situations where you would feel that they might make more mistakes. They have often tended to make less mistakes, like working with semi-pro musicians, student musicians. I've often seen them really not push too hard on the big percussion. And it could be anything from just being afraid to really play out, to maybe misinterpreting the way that the conductor looked at them, maybe having them remember how they got chewed out for being too loud on another piece, and so they're sort of transferring it over to this piece. But I've often seen things go out of balance in semi-pro community orchestra kind of situations with my music and other music, just like not really. Sometimes when the piece is a classic and everybody knows how it should sound, then that's not a big deal. But anyways, look, I really, really enjoyed this, Alberto, and once again, I wish I could evaluate the entire thing. It's a great effort, and like I said, it really has some kind of, I don't want to say typical, I don't want to say generic at all, because your ideas are your own ideas, but you picked on some strategies here which I think are kind of universal. I think that's a better way of putting it. Like a lot of the approaches that you would use would be kind of like what I would really expect from like a very centered approach that really made sure all the resources were used in their most optimum way, right? And then I would expect a lot of approaches to kind of more imitate this, maybe after they had a chance to hear your particular piece, if they were orchestrating after they had worked on their own, all right? But in the case of this challenge so far, I've evaluated, I think this is my 11th score out of 52, about 2 days into evaluating, 3 days into evaluating, and every score has been different, right? Nobody has really, I have yet to see one that is like, oh yeah, that's just like the other one that I did. So everybody is having a very unique approach. And so, anyways, yours is there as well, except we are imitating each other subconsciously here. All right, so great work, and now on to our next score in the next video.